Assalamualaikum and good morning I wish to all of you. So we are going to start our session now. I hope everyone is in great condition so that we can enjoy and at the same time get the maximal benefits from this session. Before we start our session, I would like to remind everyone, first, you may switch on your camera, but please mute your microphone to prevent any interruption during the session. Second, question and answer session will be open after the speaker have finished with his sharing. So if you have any question to the speaker, please leave them in the chat box and we will ask them for you later, or you may personally ask them during the Q&A later. Also, before we begin today's session, let's take a moment of silence for prayers. Assalamualaikum and good morning again to all the attendees of our special session today entitled International Law in Borderless World. I am Sharifah Nur Nazifah binti Muhammad Azmi from the Faculty of Sharia and Law on behalf of the International Law USIM with collaborations of Universitas Gadjah Mada will be your MC today. First and foremost, I would like to welcome our honorable speaker, Professor Dato Dr. Rahmat bin Mohammed, the Deputy Vice Chancellor, Industry Community and Alumni Network of University Technology Mara. Not forgetting all professors, lecturers, students, and audiences across countries. Welcome to our session on international law in borderless world. Before we start off with our session, let me introduce briefly to all of you our incredible and honorable speaker, Professor Dato Dr. Rahmat bin Mohammed. For your information, his areas of specialization include public international law, international criminal law, commercial law, marine biodiversity, Asian free trade area, and many more. Professor Dato Dr. Rahmat bin Mohammed is a Malaysian legal scholar. He has served University Technology Mara in Shah Alam, Malaysia in various capacities from 1986 onwards. He is also currently the chairman of National Sports Institute of Malaysia. On 23 March 2021, on the recommendations of the Bureau and the candidates proposed by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, World Commission on Environmental Law, the IUCN Council appointed Dr. Rahmat Mohammed as the Deputy Elections Officer. What is more, he has served the Asian African Legal Consultative Organization, AALCO, as the Secretary General for 2 terms. During his contribution in AALCO, he introduced a few agenda on the organization subjects of contemporary relevance, delivered academic lectures, and even published books. Thus, I bet everyone can't wait to know more about our topic today on international law in borderless world. Hence, I will pass the floor to our speaker, Professor Dato Dr. Rahmat bin Mohammed, to proceed with the session. Please welcome.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. A very good morning to all participants, my dear colleagues, professors, and students, of course. Let me begin by expressing my gratitude to the host of this webinar, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and also University Science Islam Malaysia, or USIM, and particularly to Professor Madia, Dr. Hazmi, and our colleague from Indonesia, or University Gadjah Mada, Universitas Gadjah Mada, and I'm very honored to be part of this webinar, and I look forward, in fact, for this lecture and also the questions that perhaps will be raised by students and participants generally. Today, I was given the task to talk on a general theme called international law in borderless world. What I intend to do is to focus on one particular area of very much debated and discussed currently among legal scholars around the world. That is in relation to the law relating to international law relating to pandemic, and there has been a lot of debates and area. Now, before I begin, is someone actually managing my slides? Anyone?
Yes, our technical will share.
You will be. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Good. Okay. Right. Good. I would like to focus on uh, the um, the new pandemic treaty. Before that, perhaps my comment on the theme international law in borderless world. Now, I think many of you are aware that the current international law is very much a product of the Westphalian approach. Namely, Westphalian approach means the 300-year-old Western or European-centric international law, which actually perhaps with strong foundation of strong advocates of what we call the state sovereignty doctrine, coupled with the idea of equality of states and non-intervention principle. Yeah. So what we have currently is what we say the legacy of Westphalian international law, which is very much Eurocentric. So international law that we are practicing, we can say that it is a product of post-Westphalian, post-Westphalian concept. And when we say international law in borderless world, what does it mean? Because when we say borderless, we say that international law is going beyond the state sovereignty. There is, I imagine, no borders. There will be free movement of people, free movement of trade, without any hindrance or impediment. So that is the idea of borderless world. Yeah. However, when we look at the idea of international law itself, when we talk about international law, even in the post-Westphalian international law, which is about more than 300 years old international law, the idea of borderless world may not jive or in sync with the concept of state sovereignty. I mean, each country believe that its sovereignty is actually very much intact with the borders. The boundary is very important. Between country A and country B, there is such a you are tight, or you are very much adhere to the fact that each country would have their borders. So you talk about state sovereignty. So we thought this idea of borderless world may not be applicable in the real sense. And when we talk about globalization, again, what does it entail? What does it mean by? Because globalization would be, there is an assumption that there is free movement of trade, free movement of goods, free movement of labor, free movement of people. But then again, globalization, in as far as trade is concerned, you have the current WTO that governs the trade regulation among states, you know, and that creates an unnecessary impediment as far as free trade is concerned, because everyone will take care of their interests. You talk about trade protectionism, so on and so forth. So what we have seen in relation to borderless world would probably be in terms of the application of ICT cyberspace, you know. But what does it mean by that? You know, again, is it free? Is it would there be no restriction as to the applicability of freedom of using gadgets, technology in relation to cyberspace? That have yet to be seen. Now, um, if we look at the current situation of COVID-19 pandemic, no, it's very unfortunate that when it started last year, when the declaration was made in March, many countries, especially Europe, the European countries or countries under the EU, are not very happy with the treatment of EU in terms of helping out countries, because during the pandemic, when it started, government are actually grappling to understand and trying to balance the need for health security and also the importance of economic activities. Because of that pandemic, many or borders are closed. That there is no freedom of goods moving from one country to another. What more movement of people? Nothing happened during that time. So some countries in Europe are not very happy. They are disenchanted with the kind of treatment that they have gotten from there's not much help that has been offered by EU at that time. Yeah, and now that is one. So there is this idea of not promoting regionalism. Rather, you see a lot of countries taking care of the, as I said earlier, states closing their borders, and this may go against the current treaty of international health regulation, and I will come to that later. And the last point that I wanted to say is, this is just a background first, is in relation to the new proposal that has been made by the DG of WHO and also co-sponsored by the European Council, that they thought that there is a need to establish a pandemic treaty, and what I plan to do here is, or in short, what I wanted to say in my presentation, I want to demonstrate the fact that we talk about a borderless world, international law in borderless world. We have this very challenging role of states in dominating the principle of the idea of state sovereignty. And we have a UN nation to complement this. So maybe we can move on to what the topic of my talk. Can we move on the slides, please? The next slide. Yes, this is the scope of my discussion. I will talk, I've given you the background. I will talk on the multilateralism and global governance. What have I want to talk about multilateralism, the role of United Nations and Security Council in relation to maintaining peace and security. I will focus on basically the health security. Yeah, when I talk about health security, it means the current application of international health regulation and how does it apply in relation to international law, and what are the instruments applicable, some of the provision which I thought very important, and finally what are the challenges. So this would be my topic on my on the new pandemic. Yeah, so can we move on to the next slide? Now let me begin by first looking at the United Nations, the being a very important organization. I would like to talk about the global governance and the important aspect of multilateralism in combating COVID-19. Now, uh, what happened during the when the pandemic was declared by the DG of WHO in April last year, 2020, sorry, in March 2020, 2nd of April, the United Nations General Assembly passed a resolution, Resolution 74/270, entitled Global Solidarity to Fight the Coronavirus Disease, COVID-19. Yeah? And the resolution called for intensified international cooperation to contain and defeat the pandemic, including by exchanging information, scientific knowledge, and best practices, and by applying the relevant guidelines recommended by WHO. And it further discussed on the importance of solidarity. Apart from the resolution 74/270, another resolution was passed on the 20th of April, which talk about the international cooperation and the access, yeah, ensuring what has been stressed by the General Assembly was international cooperation to ensure global access to medicine, to vaccines, and medical equipment to face COVID-19. So there was that declaration. This was a follow-up from the UN Secretary General at that time called for a global ceasefire later on in the Security Council resolution. So in other words, a month after the declaration, the UN General Assembly came up with a resolution. And the next slide, please. We move on. Next slide. Yes. So Security Council then made another resolution because it is very important for Security Council to come up with a resolution, because the idea of international and security is within the mandate of the UN Security Council. It was later on that UNSC passed a resolution, and this resolution 2532, which perhaps taking the cue from the UN Secretary General at that time, calling for a global ceasefire to focus efforts on fighting the pandemic and open humanitarian corridors to deliver aid to those most vulnerable at that time. And this is very important because the resolution is very important because number one, it recognized that the unprecedented extent of COVID-19 pandemic is likely to endanger the maintenance of international peace and security. And demand a general and immediate cessation of hostilities in all situations on its agenda. And third, it calls upon all parties to armed conflict to engage immediately in a durable humanitarian pause for at least 90 consecutive days. Now, these are very important resolution. Yeah? And actually, resolution 2532 strengthens in addressing transnational health crisis as a threat. This is actually as a threat to international peace and security. And this was done actually in 2012 in response to the HIV/AIDS epidemic under resolution 1983, the Ebola outbreak in West Africa in 2014 under the resolution 2177, in the Congo, DRC in 2018, resolution 2439. And therefore, one can say that the COVID-19 pandemic concern fall within the mandate of the Security Council under Article 24. And it has actually broadened the implication and the concept of international peace and security, because when we talk about peace and security, it is always about armed conflict. The traditional practice is to ensure that peace is maintained, security is maintained. But now we talk about COVID-19 pandemic as a threat to international peace and security. Further on, the Security Council had also passed another resolution, resolution 2565, yeah? And this was done in February, reaffirming the role of United Nations in combating and sustainably recovering from coronavirus disease pandemic, which requires greater national, regional, and international cooperation and solidarity, and a coordinated effort among nation and region to be inclusive, comprehensive, and global international response, where UN should play a key role in this respect. Yeah? And also, resolution 2565 reinforced the importance of that earlier resolution 2532, recognizing that armed conflict can exacerbate the adverse humanitarian impact of armed conflict, as well as exacerbating inequalities, and expressing concern that call for a general and immediate cessation of hostilities contained in its resolution 2532. Because this was unheeded, so they have to reinforce or resolve or go for another resolution to ensure that what has been said in the earlier resolution to be practiced. Now, resolution 2565 also talk about the principle of equitable accessibility. This is very important. As the resolution stressed that equitable access to safe, efficacious, and affordable COVID-19 vaccine is essential to end the pandemic, and highlight the impediments, including gaps in financing, supply, manufacturing capacity, and progress in vaccine access has been uneven, unfortunately. And again, recognizing the vital role of United Nations peacekeeping operation, contributing to the maintenance of international peace and security. So what is our expectation? Our expectation is that United Nations playing a very important role, a very crucial role in ensuring that peace, international peace and security is being maintained in time of COVID-19 pandemic. So we wanted to see more of united, and we hope that the UN will continue to play that role in ensuring that for us, especially in terms of equitable distribution of vaccine. You know that countries, especially the developing countries and least developed countries, not very happy, and they have voiced out their concern that you know, the distribution or the equitable distribution of vaccine have to be followed or heeded as very much expected by these countries. But unfortunately, it is slow. It is forthcoming. So I think that role had to be played by the UN. I would like to focus on global public health security. So it basically definition, it defined as the activities required by both proactive and reactive to minimize the danger and impact of acute public health event that endanger people's health across geographical region and international boundaries. Now, when the declaration was made in March last year as regard to worldwide pandemic, and there was this issues or challenged almost all government in the world, that they are grappling to understand this health security, and at the same time, you know, country economic was badly hit due to the restriction and banning on movement of people and trade. And how do we go about in ensuring that? How do we stop the pandemic? It's very difficult. Unfortunately, we are still we have not actually free. We are not. It is still not out of the wood yet. So I think it is really something that of concern all over the world. Yeah? That currently we have this, and then the latest was the Delta variant, which is something that most countries in the world are not able to cope with. Yeah. Next slide, please. Yes, I talk about equity and development. This is one concern. I think I have discussed that in relation to the distribution of vaccines, equal distribution of vaccine among states. Unfortunately, poor countries are not able to have the luxury of vaccinating their citizens. So this is one big issue that concern international community, to what extent that this country would achieve herd immunity at the end of the day. And if that is not done, then it is quite difficult, very challenging for the country to move to the next stage. Yeah. Okay. Next slide, please. We also talk about health and sustainable development goal, SDG. This is very important also because it's part of the SDG initiative to ensure that world citizens are their health are being maintained. Yeah? Move on, please. Next slide. Yes, you know, the Lancet had also published some what are the challenging moments in relation to global health security. It recognized global health security as an important standalone component of the post-2015 development agenda, and also to reduce the vulnerability of people around the world to new, acute, or rapidly spreading risks to health, particularly those threatening to cross international borders. So these are the concern way back in 2015. This has been the concern of the international medical community, yeah, in relation to the pandemic. Next slide, please. And we know of the global pandemic history. This is the COVID-19 pandemic is not the first. It has been the world's problem much earlier. And this, if you read the literature on global pandemic history, it's really a problem to the international community at large. Move on, please. Next slide. And what the community have discovered is the inadequate means exist at both national and global level to protect health in global policy-making arenas outside of the health sector, such as health can be a subordinate under other objectives. In other words, health is not really put in priority in any government. And this is something that is very alarming until we now know that the importance of ensuring that that the COVID-19, the coronavirus is not being spread, but this occurs, and that is the main concern in relation to stopping or preventing this type of virus all over the world. Continue, please. And as I said earlier, currently there is only one international binding instrument that is being applicable. That is the international health regulation. Many of us are not aware of this treaty. It is currently the global. It is a global binding instrument of international law that has entered into force on 15 June 2007. Yeah, and continue. Yeah, and there is it started in 1851. Yeah? The idea of having a global treaty started in 1851. First call. It was first introduced under the International Sanitary Conference in Paris. And then in 1951, after the Second World War, the first international sanitary regulation was adopted by the WHO member state during that time. And this was replaced in 1969, what is called as International Health Regulation, IHR. And in 1995, it was revised. And in 2005, the revision or the revised edition of that international health regulation was adopted by the World Health Assembly. And the World Health Assembly in 2006 adopted the IHR 2005 and later entered into force in 2007. Yeah? Carry on. Next slide. And currently, there are 196 countries across the globe that have given their consent to implement the treaty with a view, this is very important, with a view to prevent, protect against, control, and provide a public health response to the international spread of disease in ways that are commensurate with and restricted to public health risks, and which avoid unnecessary interference with international traffic and trade. So that is the idea of having this treaty, and most of the ASEAN countries are members of this treaty, and being a signatory to the treaty, you are bound by the treaty, and there is this very important obligation, that is to notify any public health occurrence, including potential communicable diseases which may constitute a public health emergency of international concern, which is in short PHEIC, within its territory to the WHO within 24 hours of assessment of public health information. Yeah? So that is an obligation, or state is obligated If becoming a signatory to that, then you are obliged to follow that, to inform, to report as regard to any public health occurrence. Yeah, move on. Next one. This is what I said earlier, that there is a obligation. You are legally obliged to notify to WHO within 24 hours of assessment. Now, this has been there's been a debate on this, yeah, because some countries accuse China for not informing much earlier, notifying WHO as regard to what actually occurred in one of their territories in China. So actually, if you are a member, you are bound by law to inform or notify WHO. Move on, yeah. And here, there is also an obligation. Yeah? The state is under compulsory obligation to strengthen core surveillance and response capacities at the primary, intermediate, and national level, as well as at designated international ports, airports, and ground crossing. They further introduced a series of health documents, including ship sanitation certificate and an international certificate of vaccination of prophylaxis for travelers. Yeah? So again, these are some of the regulation. These are some of the obligation that has been imposed to signatories of this treaty. Yeah, and the stated purpose and the scope of IHR 2005 are to prevent, protect against, control, and provide a public health response to the international spread of disease in ways that are commensurate with and restricted to public health risks, and which avoid unnecessary interference with international traffic and trade. So the state is under compulsory obligation to strengthen core surveillance. This is what I said earlier. To strengthen core surveillance and response capacities at the primary, intermediate, and national level. So these are the obligations. Yeah? Move on. Next slide, please. And the other thing is that the idea of building capacity. Through its regulatory system, most countries have consented to build their capacities to detect, assess, and report public health events. So this is very important. This is an obligation, a legal obligation by any signatory of the treaty, building capacity. Move on, please. And the regulation permits WHO to take into account on unofficial sources such as non-governmental organizations, scientists, and social networks in print and electronic media. So countries also agreed to develop core capacities in terms of passing a legislation, national focal points, and pandemic planning, and to implement in implementing the regulation. Yeah? Carry on, please. And non-compliance of health security and regulatory system, I think these have been, much of it has been defied or offended because it is interesting to note in applying strictly the IHL 2005, many of the travel ban and restriction implemented by state government during COVID-19 outbreak are in defiance of, because when country ban from movement, people movement or closing the border, this is one aspect that has been violated by states. And as I said earlier, the other area of violation of state is in relation to the obligation of state to report their health measures to the WHO. And this is most troubling compliance of the treaty because, as reported, at least 2/3 of these countries have not reported their additional health measures to WHO. And under IHR, states are linked to inform and notify to WHO. And as many countries fail to regard the legal requirement to promptly report any additional health measures, the problem is that WHO is handicapped and disabled to coordinate the world's response to any catastrophic public health emergencies. And more importantly, the unavailability of accurate reports lead to preventing countries from holding them legally accountable for their obligation under the 2005 treaty. Move on. Can we move on? Next slide. Yes, I've mentioned this. Can you, next slide? I mentioned this too, yes. And despite this legal effect, the unilateral action to ban or restrict travel by some countries with a view to prevent further escalation of the virus affecting the national of the countries are implemented by many countries. Yeah? Because the practice by some of these states proved to be effective. And when you ban movement, you close your borders, this proved to be effective, and thereby it encouraged other countries to do the same. Yeah? But this is not good, because the long-term effect is it would make global governance ineffective. Yeah? And following the traditional international law, where key personalities are states and international organizations, and for now, only states are subject to legal scrutiny, and non-state actors like corporation and other non-governmental actors are outside. Unfortunately, are outside of this treaty obligation. And in addition, the treaty is devoid of robust accountability mechanism for compliance, enforcement, oversight, and transparency. So, yes, next, please. Next slide, please. Yes, before I come to this, so my conclusion of the current international health regulation is that the current international security regulatory system is a standalone system. Yeah? And the uncoordinated unilateral action taken by various governments during the pandemic COVID-19 and WHO playing the role to monitor the development of the situation is a testament that there is indeed a dire need for coordinated effort between the various international organizations like the ICAO, IMO, and WTO to work closely with WHO. And therefore, there is a need for reform of the whole health security regulatory system, which must consider the feasibility of harmonizing with international transportation system, trade of goods, and movement of people. Yeah? So it is not just a standalone obligation. At the moment, the international health regulation not effectively because there is no coordination between the various organizations that I mentioned earlier, the ICAO, IMO, and WTO. And the fact that the US and most developed countries of Western Europe, and the COVID was declared, and when this country unilaterally working on their own in fighting the invisible common enemy of COVID-19, it clearly signaled the need to establish consultative mechanism among states. And despite IHR 2005 being a treaty, the needed reform should be hard legal instrument. Yeah? They're leaving no room for soft instrument approach, because first there is a need to design a compulsory mechanism for alert to act much earlier, and the alert system must be a built-in compulsory mechanism. This one. Secondly, compliance can also be made possible through the availability of coordination platform between WHO and other international organizations, as I mentioned earlier. IMO, WTO, and ICAO. And thirdly, the UN, as I said earlier, need to play a vital role. They have to be more, they have to be forward-looking. They have to ensure that the mandate to WHO is being, there is a need to coordinate, not just WHO, but other international organizations. And this will require political commitment in ensuring the successful coordination with other international agencies. I think all in all, IHL therefore need to look at and review, and that I think the implementation of an effective health security regulatory system must not be limiting the sovereign right of every state. Rather, in unprecedented time, what is desperately needed is the cooperation and solidarity movement through science and technology diplomacy to ensure peace and health security being maintained in this world. Yeah? So can we move on to the next slide, please? Yes, this is the next part that I would like to discuss, that is in relation to the global support for a new pandemic treaty. I think the fact that the current IHR, the shortcoming, because of the shortcoming of the current treaty, the IHR 2005. So apparently at the WHO recent 74th World Health Assembly had encouraged member states to consider negotiating a new pandemic treaty with an ambitious target of 2022, next year, being the date open for signature. Now, the idea of the treaty was first mooted by the EU Council President Charles Michel, and later followed by the WHO Director General. Together, they and leaders of 26 countries of Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America issued an open letter calling for a global treaty on pandemic prevention and preparedness and response. So the supporters or the exponent of the treaty highlighted the main objective of the treaty is to foster a comprehensive multi-sectoral approach to enhance regional and global capacities and resilient to future pandemic. So going against this idea, those who do not support this idea question the need to have the treaty when major issues like inequitable access to treatment and taking concrete measures to counter the monopolies of pharmaceutical industries have not been responded with vigor by high-income countries. So you have two sides of a story. One would want to have a new pandemic treaty. The other one is the basic question has not been responded. The idea of equitable assessment of the treatment, how do you help the poor countries? This has not been responded. So how can we have a pandemic treaty when you have these fundamental issues not being resolved? And a crucial issue that must be addressed by a member state of WHO is first, this is my thought, my view, whether the current global regulatory regime on health security is sustainable to cope with the pandemic responses. That is my first question. And secondly, will the treaty assure an improvement of the shortcoming found in the current international regulatory system? Now, as I said earlier, the primary law and the only international legal treaty governing the outbreak of infectious diseases is the current IHR, or the International Health Regulation 2005. This treaty empowers WHO to act as the main global surveillance system. In short, the current treaty provides the legal architecture outlining what government must do to prevent, detect, and respond to outbreak of infectious disease. And this includes sharing of information about emerging pathogens, with the WHO and implementing public health intervention to prevent disease transmission. And since 2007, this has been implemented, and you know, the idea of that treaty, IHR 2005, when it was implemented, is not just about to prevent diseases. The IHR aims for international collaboration to prevent, protect against, control, and provide a public health response to the international spread of disease in ways that are commensurate with and restricted to public health risks and that avoid unnecessary interference with international traffic and trade. So the legal mandate requires maintenance of a balance between national public health and international freedom of trade of movement, international freedom of trade movement. Hence, there exists the inherent defect. That what is the inherent defect of the current regulatory regime? While pursuing its role to ensure and safeguard global public health within the domain of WHO, freedom of trade movement is fundamentally state jurisdiction. So one of the major challenges since the WHO declaration of COVID-19 pandemic, March last year to 2020, is the global response in managing public health emergencies that involve several layers of complex issues on sovereignty, on economic interests, and national security consideration. And to date, WHO plays a central role in surveillance, risk assessment, and response, and aim at ensuring an effective but proportionally public health response to avoid unnecessary interference with traffic and trade. So state practice are under an obligation to cooperate in good faith with WHO and one another by assessing health events occurring on their territory, notifying to WHO those which reach a certain threshold of gravity, providing detailed information and taking a range of measures depending on the nature of the health event. And most importantly, state parties must achieve and maintain a set of core capacities. Yeah, this is important in their respective national health system, rather than only at point of entry, such as ports and airports, as was the case for the previous IHR. So this also proved to be one of the challenges in implementing with the IHR, lacking both a dedicated funding mechanism, yeah, and a formal mechanism for compliance monitoring. In part due to this shortcoming, many countries are still far from achieving the required capacities because this needs to be addressed. Yeah. Country capacity building is very important. And the necessity to collaborate through a transparency system in responding and reporting to health emergency is the most fundamental focus of the global legal regime on health security. In realities, however, many governments fail to follow what has been legally agreed upon under the IHR or the treaty, 2005 treaty. Particularly, they defaulted in failure to report and unilaterally imposed travel ban and restriction well before the declaration of the pandemic took place. So among the criticism of the present treaty or IHR is that it is technical and legal tool and delineating government obligation to prevent, protect, detect, and respond to the emerging pathogens without empowering the WHO to enforce against those countries infringing the rules in the IHR. And this is an inherent defect. Yeah? Enforcement is an inherent defect that need to be addressed. And to ensure commitment by state, there must be effective legal tools for enforcement. Then only compliance will be followed by state. Now, mindful that compliance of data sharing, upgrading of national capacity in terms of health and medical treatment requires huge financial investment for poor countries, concrete measures to assist by high-income countries must be seen to be their priorities. So there is a need to look at the capacity there is a need to look at the huge investment that poor countries need to make. So they don't have the money. So there is, therefore, the need to share this burden, particularly the contribution of rich countries. But unfortunately, we don't see this forthcoming, and it's not being demonstrated by a rich country. So what are the challenges in trying to introduce this new pandemic treaty? So like any other global regulatory initiative, the main challenge, if this new pandemic is going to be introduced, because it's very ambitious, it's broad, and may make it the scope itself, is very challenging for the proposal to be universally accepted. Now, the priorities of countries are diverse, and in any diplomatic negotiation, unless and until several deals are made during the negotiation, such a treaty may not be forthcoming, despite its correct and true narrative. So national priorities normally precede the global needs unless the careful crafted treaty incorporates the priorities and demand of the state, which outcome may be impracticable. Now, the other challenge is the government commitment to agree on the treaty would implicate submitting the part of their jealously guarded Westphalian construct sovereignty to WHO, fearing that they will lose their sovereignty. So this is another problem, because when it comes to disease control, state will have to submit to the WHO monitoring and surveillance. This would mean state will have to renunciate their sovereign powers in matters pertaining to authority to share information, to recommend public health measures, and to enhance national capacity. So achieving the ambitious goal in making the treaty a reality will be subjected to a few conditions. What are the conditions before a treaty can go through? First, like any treaty, it needed countries to ratify. Any multilateral agreement, this would take years until it is fully accepted, because one treaty will take many years. I mean, the example of WTO, example of climate change, it need number of years before it become a reality. And meanwhile, the process will require negotiation, not just negotiation, and also compromise between states. And the quid pro quo principle will apply until it is fully accepted. Now, secondly, most developing and least developed countries do not have the luxury of experts to advise government in highly technical areas. Hence, government must allow researchers and NGOs to be actively involved, to play their role in as far as providing expertise and specialization. So inclusivity of other than government bodies in matters concerning treaty negotiation are either unknown or at least expected in these poor countries. And thirdly, the challenge of limiting the scope of the agreement to key issues, focusing on the current shortcoming of the current International Health Regulation 2005, for example, implementing an effective system for exchanging and verifying information on threats, as well as appropriate response mechanism, monitoring of the implementation of the treaty provision and enforcing responsibility for their violation. So this is another challenge. They look at the current shortcoming of IHR, or the International Health Regulation. And fourthly, resolving the issues of seeking accountability, as well as the problem of verifying compliance with the new regulation will also need to be addressed in the treaty. And finally, addressing possible conflict between the provision of the new treaty and the present IHR 2005, which could adversely affect the application of the standard contained in both. So in this regard, the 30th March proposal that the International Health Regulation 2005 would strengthen the treaty is not sufficiently clear. So you have to be clearer on what are the objectives of this new pandemic treaty. So those are the points that I would like to make, and finally the conclusion. These are the challenges I mentioned earlier. Sorry, it's in a small print. I think we must look at the current health security regulatory system, the international health regulation. It is a standalone system. You need to design a compulsory mechanism for alert to act much earlier, and the alert system must be built on compulsory mechanism. The problem with the current regulation is that it lacks enforcement, and that there is no coordination platform between WHO and other international organizations. Because if you want to talk about free movement of goods, you have to coordinate with WTO, with the IMO, the migration, and also the traffic, air traffic. So this must be done together. And I thought that UN must play a vital role in ensuring that, as I said earlier, peace and security need to be maintained, because this is also war. I mean, fighting and combating pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic is war. So we have to treat that as an important responsibility for the UN, especially the UN Security Council. The other aspect that need reflection is on food and agriculture. Again, the connection between food and agriculture. We talk about food security with health security regulatory system. Then we talk about protection for migrant workers and refugees, health security, and basic human right protection. And of course, finally, the cooperation and solidarity movement through science and technology diplomacy. I think big data is very important. Decisions are not made on assumption. We know the importance of data, the importance of science and technology. Perhaps that could be taken as a diplomacy, and these are all very important aspects that must not be ruled out in ensuring that if we want to have a new pandemic treaty to replace the international health regulation, then these are the points that need to be made. As I said, the health security regulatory system cannot stand alone. It is not just about health. It is about human movement. It is about trade, movement of goods. It is about ensuring that migrant workers are safe. It is also about refugees. So it covers all aspects of human life. So these need to be coordinated. So I will stop there, and if there is any question you would like to ask, maybe we can start with that. I'll be very glad to answer those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Now we are open for the Q&A session. If you have any question, you can leave them in the chat box and we can ask them for you. Don't forget to state your name and of course the question. Or you can unmute your audio, introduce yourself and ask your question. Okay, Prof, we have one question from Robert Sanders. He said that, hi, Prof, is enforcement of public international law any different in a borderless world, or does it face the same difficulties?
Thank you for the question. I will answer this first. Enforcement is one of the major challenges in ensuring that international law will be observed or abide by international community. This is an ongoing challenge. You have a treaty. Who is going to enforce it? That's why you need an entity called the UN Security Council. If you look at, for example, the ICC of the Rome Statute, from the very beginning, countries had given the mandate to UN Security Council to ensure that the enforcement part of it will be dealt with. Yeah, because in ICC, we want to end impunity. No one should be left, or should escape from criminal liability. So who is the best? Because the world do not have police force, but we have UN Security Council. So they make that decision. So like what I'm suggesting is that the UN Security Council must play its vital role as mandated, yeah, and ensuring that there is this enforcement element, yeah, under international. Otherwise, it will just become a mantra without it being implemented at the end of the day. Yeah. So it's the same. Yeah. Enforcement has always been the key challenge in ensuring that international law is being observed. But having said that, it does not mean that international law is not being observed. The defiance of international law is only by a few states. Not all the members of the UN, not all the countries in the world defy international law. They observe international law. It is only when countries defy, when countries violated international, that we question the element of enforcement. But I think we have to look at the bigger picture. It does ensure, international does ensure that countries behave to one another, respect one another, and that and overall is to ensure that peace and security is being maintained. Yeah? So okay, that is question. I hope I answer your question.
Okay, Prof. So I see that Muhammad Kamal raised his hand. So
Yeah.
please, Muhammad Kamal.
Assalamualaikum, Prof.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you for your very eye-opening lecture just now. So from your lecture, I just have a few questions to ask. Okay, first regarding the idea of the borderless international law in the borderless world. So if you can see, it is not an easy idea to be materialized because if I may refer to the UN system itself, it impedes multilateralism and also realizing the idea of borderless world, because we can see we have the system of Security Council where it will some states will preserve its sovereignty for its main interest. So I think that will impede all the multilateralism effort, as well as to materialize the idea of international law in the borders world. So how do you think about that, Prof?
Okay, Kamal, thank you for the question. Yes, when we talk about multilateralism, we talk about something that is against unilateralism, of course, that every effort has to be made to ensure that multilateralism is being practiced. Now, it's a bit of, I don't know whether you want to, is it a paradox that while we promote multilateralism, but we don't see multilateralism being practiced by Security Council. Well, that is a very challenging question, because Security Council gets their mandates from who? From member state of the UN, of course. Giving mandate, and then the idea of Security Council is to ensure that peace and security is maintained. Yeah, so they will have to use their authority to ensure that that idea of peace and security is always being maintained. to say that they are not 100% working or making an effort for multilateralism is not also true, because we see that in fighting or combating COVID-19 pandemic, finally they come up with resolutions, two resolutions, 25, the first resolution, unfortunately it was not heeded, and then they move on to strengthen that resolution by saying that you have to stop, armed conflict during the pandemic. And I think that is where you see their role becoming very vital and important. Yeah? Because when this COVID-19 pandemic starts, what we have in mind is to ensure that, especially in armed conflict areas, that there shouldn't be any conflict, or not, there shouldn't be ongoing wars. Yeah? So this is the role of the Security Council, to stop, to cease any conflict. Yeah? That is one. Secondly, the big picture is ensuring peace and security. So COVID-19, as I said, COVID-19 pandemic is like, you have to treat it like a world war. So again, the only my reservation is that they did not work quickly to respond to the need of what is their role. We always want to see that the UN, especially the UN Security Council, play a bigger role, a vital role in finally ensuring that no countries will be the victim of armed conflict, or even for example, on the equitable distribution of vaccine. And this is where we want to see UN monitoring or ensuring, because that Africa and also many least developed countries are not getting their help, but they can't afford the luxury of getting their people being vaccinated, all of their people to be vaccinated. And that pharmaceutical, this vaccine is the monopoly of just a few pharmaceutical companies. So this is, I think UN must play that vital role to ensure a fair, equitable distribution of vaccine among countries or states. Yeah? So I think they should play that role. I know they should not impede multilateralism. I agree with you that in a way it must not be seen. But I think what we should say is that we want to see more effort being made by the UN Security Council, especially to ensure peace and security of the world being maintained. Yeah? Rather than on the we put on the extreme and say, well, multilateralism is something that UN is not doing. No, it is. They should do more. We want to see them doing more. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, Prof. And next we have Miss Patricia Audrey raising her hand, so
yeah,
you can ask.
Yes. Assalamualaikum.
Waalaikumsalam.
I want to ask about since IHR already requires states to fulfill the core capacity requirement, as it is the COVID-19 has been classified as the public health emergency of international concern. To what extent the activity of the state individual present? I mean, the development and the reenactment of IHR contact point on the national level of its country may help to detect this problem. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the question. Very good question. While we want to see core capacity being enforced at the state level, one of the challenges, as I said earlier, is the investment that need to be made by state to ensure that you have built up that capacity. in terms of so many things, preventive measures. What about the vaccines? What about the medicine? What about the distribution of that? I think what is important is if you want state to achieve that capacity, because they alone knows the level of ensuring that they have achieved that objective. They only know. But if you don't have that capacity, especially the poor states, the least developed countries, how are you going to ensure that they have achieved that capacity? So capacity building, you cannot just leave two countries. You have to look at the status of the country, the economic status of the country. If they are least developed, how can they achieve that if you don't have the money to invest? Because scientific, the laboratories are expensive. They need that. That's why in ASEAN, you see that countries are specializing. They are given the task. What Malaysia must do, what Indonesia must do, what Philippines must do, and they have to work together. At the regional level, I think we have done that at ASEAN level. So if that can be done, regionally, it can help the poorer countries not to invest so much, because investment in terms of medical facilities, in terms of research, is very expensive. It's not cheap. So it is not just the obligation of every country to the rich country must assist, must ensure that the poor countries or least developed countries are being assisted financially. So that core competency or core capacity can only be achieved if it is that is being done. To me, financially, the investment have to come not only, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the luxury to establish a very expensive lab, for example. So apart from rich nation, it is also the job of the rich pharmaceutical companies to assist these countries. So that is my response. I hope I answer your question.
Thank you very much, Prof.
Thank you, Patricia.
Okay, next I invite Mr. Robert Sanders to ask his question.
Hi, Prof. Hello.
Hi.
Sorry. Hi. So I noticed the main criticism against multilateralism is that on paper it appears very good, like international cooperation, but in practice the benefits appear rather selective. Right? On the bottom line, it's only really a few countries that you see benefiting greatly from it. So to some extent, that dissatisfaction has led to the rise of some extremist groups, of some authoritarian regimes all over the world. So when we look at the UN and the Security Council, they say peace and security, but a lot of countries ask peace and security for whom? Like we see the vaccines, it's not, there's vaccine inequity all over the world, and you can't really blame them. They have to take care of their own countries first. So how do you think the UN agencies can build more legitimacy aside from trade sanctions, enforcement sanctions? How can the UN reach out and build stronger legitimacy amongst these countries? And is there another mechanism that's being thought of by international law scholars aside from relying on these UN agencies?
Thank you. Very good question again. Too much reliance on UN is hopelessly in dire need. We want to see more effort comes from UN to ensure that, as you said, peace and security is assured in the world. But what I see in the case of this COVID-19 pandemic is the coordination within the international organization that need to be done, that need to be expedited, that need to be enforced. Because when you talk about, as I said earlier, it is not just about the human health security. It is also about freedom of movement of goods, movement of trade. So that requires WTO to come in, World Trade Organization to come in. When you talk about migrant workers or movement of labor, for example, then you talk about having ILO to coordinate with WHO. You talk about refugees, you talk about armed conflict. So what need to be done is the coordination effort among or within the international organization. UN is perhaps a cripple international organization. So I think what UN need to do is to get these agencies to work with WHO and them as a coordinator. I think that can be done, and it must be done that way, because as I said earlier, IHR is international regulation is not just about preventing diseases, but also to ensure that the movement of trade is not impeded. So it's a balance between health security and also economic activities. You know that is happening. This is happening in our countries. Your country government is grappling. How do you balance this? You know, in Malaysia, for example, you want to enforce the strict movement of people, stay at home, lockdown. But if you do that, it will cause harm to economy. So how do we go about this? So there must be a greater coordination between agencies, you know, because often we heard that, you know, in Malaysia, not enough coordination is being made among government agencies. They don't understand each other, you know. You give one, you know, mandate, one authority, but other departments which are very much involved are not being given that mandate. So it's difficult. This is not just about giving authority or mandate to WHO, but also to other agencies. I think this must be done speedily. So that is my view on the whole thing, Robert.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Prof. Next, we will proceed with the question in the chat box. It's from Nur Dalila Zulkarnain. She said, Prof, since you are suggesting UN should play the role when there is no coordination in terms of global health law, so if I may know, for now, what has been done by the UN in tackling this kind of challenges in global health law?
I think effort has been made to call upon, you know, first to give the mandate to WHO to continue doing their job, their role, you know, as a body that takes care of health security. But at the same time, I think UN also need as I said, the coordination or ensuring that being implemented. Other part of UN agencies or international agencies have to help out on that. I think they have been talking about the coordination among international organizations or international agencies to ensure that the objective is being achieved. I think it's important that they have to start not just talking but coordinate and work on it. That's why if the idea of the new pandemic is giving authority or mandate to WHO, it cannot work. Cannot work that way, because the movement of air traffic, for example, the movement of people, the movement of goods, all this requires not just WHO but other international agencies. I think they identify that as the main challenge and need to address those issues. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Next question we have from Nadira Zulkifli. She asked, Prof, I have a question from the diagram of global support for a new pandemic treaty. Why Malaysia is not a part in supporting this new pandemic treaty? Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. I have no privy to that, but I know that Indonesia has been invited to be part of that, I suppose, proposal to form or to establish a pandemic treaty. But I think at the ASEAN level, what needs to be done is that, again, ASEAN government will have to discuss on how best that this new pandemic would benefit international community, would benefit the world, from, because this is the future. Now that we have this COVID-19, I'm sure there'll be more infectious diseases. So to respond to that in future, what are the things that need to be done? As I said earlier, it can be done in relation to health security because it involves other things. I mean, our life, for example, are not just about taking medicine or taking vaccine, but other things. We want to buy things. We want to make sure that we survive. How do we survive? We need a lot of movement. We want to move around. So I think it has to be a comprehensive approach, holistic approach to ensure that the objective achieved. And it cannot be a piecemeal kind of, okay, this is the problem, use, IHL or the health regulation is about medicine, is about doctors, is about, no, it's not that. It involves everybody. Yeah. So sorry, I don't have a preview to why Malaysia is not in, but I'm very happy that Indonesia is in, and I think that can, further expand it to ASEAN. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Prof. Next question is from Zuirdina Hassanin. It said that, Prof, as you have mentioned earlier, there have been several countries which were against the proposal of the new health treaty on basis that the fundamental issues were still not resolved yet. So, is there any mechanism or regulation enforced by any global health security which aim to prevent further breach or non-compliance of IHR 2005 upon the signatory states?
Thank you for the question. I think, as I said earlier, we cannot deal with this pandemic based, or the approach cannot be a piecemeal approach. We have to be comprehensive and holistic, meaning that when we talk about global health security, it involves other aspects of human life. For example, trade, free movement of people, yeah. Even during the armed conflict areas, how do you deal with refugees? How you deal with combatants, so on and so forth. So I think this need to be taken into account or to be considered to make it more comprehensive rather than just looking at one aspect of global health issues. Yeah. So that need to be discussed further. I don't believe in, because this has been discussed, the scholars have discussed this, they have debated these issues. I think one of the scholars involved, Professor Murase, he is currently the member of the International Law Commission, and he has come up with a proposal that it has to be comprehensive in that manner. Yeah.
Okay, so we proceed with the next question. I hope you're okay, Prof. We have a few more questions. And the question is about, hi, Prof. It was said that the objective of international health regulation to respond to international spread of disease that affects international trade. But my question, is there any obligation or justification to apply this treaty when the outbreak of particular disease occurs within a state?
Yes, it's a state matter. Yeah, because it happened in one particular state, then it spread because of the movement of people, migration, workers, so on and so forth. So it's, as I said, you cannot just look at one issue that is in relation to the disease itself. Yeah, so you have to look at the overall picture. If you are going to just deal with the disease or the virus, then it will not help to solve the issues. Yeah? In fact, if you look at IHR, as I said earlier, it is not just about preventive or preventing the disease or containing the disease in one place or in one state, but also look so that trade or movement of trade is not impeded or impede, sorry. Yeah? So that, what does it mean? It is in relation to economic activities too. Yeah. But I agree with you that it all started in one particular state. And the irony of it, despite the fact that one cannot simply close borders, but this has been done, yeah, by many states, because they said that doing that is effective, that we cannot allow others to come into our country, so we have to close the border. Yeah? But if you look at the law, you cannot do that until you get the clearance. The clearance would be the declaration by WHO. Yeah? When it is only when it is declared as a pandemic that you need to do something. Yeah. So closing borders is something that goes against. If you do it unilaterally, will go against the treaty. So yeah, it happened in one state, but how do you? That's why there is a need to have a capacity building, that you need to establish. You need to have the capacity. How do you control this sort of diseases or the virus? Probably have your own very probably high-tech labs, so on and so forth, that to ensure that it is being contained in your state. But unfortunately, that is not happening, because, as I said, because of movement of goods and people. Yeah. Okay. Right.
Okay, Prof. Next question is from Nadatul Janma. She said that, hi Prof, I'm Nadia. You had mentioned about the rich countries are hard to help the poor countries. In your view, what crucial matters that must be done and addressed by UN to help these poor countries?
UN can only probably appeal to states, to especially rich countries, to assist and talk about equitable distributions of medicine or vaccine. Not beyond that, because it is up to the state, as somebody said just now, very selective kind of perhaps assistance be given by a rich country to poor states, for example. I think other than that, we cannot. That's why regionalism is very important. ASEAN, for example, we help each other. We know that not all our members are rich nation. So how do we go about it? We establish very high tech kind of labs, then it will be assisted by other ASEAN member states. I know that ASEAN is doing that at the moment, and this help in a sense. So regionalism would be more effective compared to UN being a big organization looking after 193 countries, for example, being members of the UN. So if you go on a smaller scale, regionalism, ASEAN, for example, would be a more ideal situation where countries can help each other, because I think they know better. They are very familiar with the region. They know each other's, all our neighbors. And I think that the spirit of helping one another or bonding is more real compared to the UN. So I think one way is to look at regionalism as a solution to the difficulties. Of course, rich countries would, it's not that they are not helping the poor states, they do, but it could be selective. They could have their own criteria in helping those countries. But I would like to see more of region playing a better role. ASEAN, for example, would be the best region or organization that can assist the 10 countries or the 10 member states. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, Prof. So we have 2 more questions.
Yeah.
It is from Eriska Jinalita. It said that, Assalamualaikum, Prof. I have a question. How to harmonize the international health regulation into national regulation? Every country, and another question is, every country has different strategies to combat the COVID-19 outbreak. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. In fact, the idea of IHR is also to look at the state capacity. Yeah. So the state must come up with their regulations. I think it is only natural in international law that any international treaties will be domestic, will be made. The mini law of that international treaty will come into play if countries adopt that law to be part of the state. Yeah, this again will depend on whether the state player is practicing dualism or monism. Whether the constitution allow automatic adoption of international treaty automatically at the national level. So that is one aspect. Is Yeah, the harmonization of international law at the national level would depend, as I said, on what is the state practice as regard to adopting or practicing international law. Of course, every state would have their own strategies, but that's why I said if you have a region like ASEAN, perhaps sharing of best practice is good in that sense. Is lockdown, for example, a very effective way to ensure or to curb or to flatten the curve? If that is a good way, then perhaps we can practice that. What are the practices? What are the strategies? That's why in ASEAN, I think the information sharing among member states are, they do that. I know that Malaysia and Singapore are very closely knit, and I think they share information because we are very close neighbors, and that is being done. Okay, if we see that the strategy that has been designed by Singapore is something that is good, that can be practiced, we probably can adopt that. So it is true, state would have their own strategies, but I would like to see that at the regional level that can be shared, that best practice can be shared with other member states of that particular region. Yeah? Of course, harmonization of international law will finally stop at the national level. Yeah, but that's why you see that some of the treaties would say that before the requirement is that you must adopt national that particular treaty to become part of your domestic laws. That must be done. Yeah, if that is the okay.
Okay, Prof. Next question. I hope you're okay. You got many questions.
Yeah.
Next question from Jonathan Mali White. He said that, hi Prof, I want to hear inputs from you about ICAO policy. ICAO Annex 17 speaks about aviation security, while Annex 9 is about facilitation that includes quarantine and health border clearance. Can it be possible for the ICAO to compel all contracting member states to include in their national aviation plan? For example, an outbreak of a communicable disease posing health emergency. How about those who will not follow? How ICAO deal with that?
Thank you. Thank you for the question. I think this applies to every international organization. If you have, as I said, treaty, international treaty or convention, how then you want to ensure that at the national level this has been implemented? Now, it will depend very much on how that international treaty being drafted. Now, in as far as IHR is concerned, the provision on national capacity or capacity building is part of the obligation, state obligation. So that can be perhaps incorporated in ICAO, but it depends very much on whether countries will be ready to accept those obligations. Yeah, it will take some time. Yeah, it will take some time because in any international treaties, there'll be a long period of negotiation, diplomatic conferences until finally it's being accepted. So there you have the compromises being made, quid pro quo being made, so on and so forth, before finally it become a product of international status. And again, as I said, that treaty can somehow rather incorporate what national law should be. Must it follow agreed upon at the international stage? This is something that state may not want to do because it involves their call, the state. Actually, when it comes to state legislation, this is something that state may not want to apply, because they feel that that is an encroachment or infringement of state sovereignty. So that is why most international treaty will take a longer time. It'll take long, 1 decade probably, until finally it is being accepted by all the states. So that is the challenge actually. Wanting state to follow what has been being incorporated by international treaty. Now, of course, the idea of enforcement is another issue. As I said, the weakest point of international law is in relation to enforcement. Having said that, not all countries would violate international obligation. They will follow. It is only when you see a few countries that violated international law, then you say, oh, there is no enforcement of the law. No, it's not like with that. Generally, countries would behave, countries would follow the rules and regulation that has been stipulated under the treaties or convention. Okay?
Okay, Prof. So there is last question from Dani.
Okay.
Yeah. Ironically, and on a local level, what part or role can educational institution play in bracket, specific example, law school, youth organization, to contribute in big issues such as this one concerning the international arena? What encouragement can you give to citizens that are far from the governance or policy-making ranks? Thank you, Prof.
Thank you. I think as citizens of your country, we are all, we have to be responsible. I think law school play an important role. At one time in Malaysia, international law is not compulsory. I remember during my time, it was just an optional paper. So if it is an optional paper, not many students would want to take the challenge because they don't see the importance of international law. But you now know that law is important. We are not living in vacuum. We depend each other. There is an interdependency of states. Even rich countries depend on the poor state to ensure that at the end of the day, peace and security are maintained. Yeah. So I think international law studies therefore would help. I don't know whether Indonesia or I think most ASEAN countries now make international law as a compulsory. If you are a law student, you must do international law. So in that sense, that itself has created you have a very important role to play. In other words, the law school should be the spokesperson, to the government body to say that certain laws are very important. I know that many are not aware that we have an international treaty called the International Health Regulation 2005. Not many are aware of that. That exists, and that there are obligations on the state to follow the IHR. But you need, therefore, to have, I'm not a specialist in this area, but as a public international lawyer, I need to know what is going on. What are the shortcomings of the present law and how do we ensure that it is being improved? And I think with the existence of law school nowadays, I think you play a very important role. You are the catalyst of the role that you play. You are lawyers, then you will practice law, but you must you cannot say that international law is not important, that you just want to focus on domestic law. No, our life has been very much affected. Look at climate change, for example. Everyone is affected. We have the Paris Agreement. That applies to every state. That applies to every one of us. You talk about biodiversity, it is also applicable to everybody. So one cannot just leave out international law in vacuum and say that, oh, it is, those, leave it to the idealist. No, it's not. It is something that is very important. So you play an important role. The law school play an important role. And I think we have seen the importance of that. The Asian International Law Society, the ASEAN International Law Society, I think play an important role. I think Indonesia, they have their chapters of international lawyers, Malaysia too. I think all over ASEAN would have that. I think what we need is to have a bigger, I think we have ASEAN Law Association, I think there are excellent association. The ALA, ASEAN Law Association, works with all kind of lawyers, and I think this will be one platform that you can affiliate. So I think that is your role, and I think we are going through this is an unprecedented moment. I think you can still contribute. We should contribute to the development of international law. So I hope I encourage you to really work on international law. Right. Okay.
Okay, Prof. Thank you, Prof, for answering. Thank you, Prof, for answering all the questions from the participants. Now we have ended the session within few blinks. It's so fast, but the insight and knowledge that I've gotten countless. In order to value our distinguished speaker's precious contribution today, we would like to display an e-certificate for Professor Dato Dr. Rahmat Muhammad. Thank you, Prof, for your contribution.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Lovely. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in order to capture this wonderful moment into our memories, we would like to invite the honorable speaker to have a virtual photo session together. The audience may turn on the camera.
All right. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum. All right, and hi everyone. So I will be in charge with taking pictures. I will give everyone around 1 minute to prepare. All right. Okay, I will take the picture now. Okay. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay. One more time. 1, 2, 3, smile. Okay, thank you everyone. So regarding the slides, we will give the slide and recorded lecture after the session, after the end of the session, in the participants kit Google Drive. I will pass the floor to the moderator.
Thank you very much to our honorable speaker for being the biggest part of our session today. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate your time, valuable contribution, and especially your precious knowledge. We would like to also extend our warm gratitude to all the participants for today's session. We hope that you have gained as much input as possible. So, on behalf of the International Law Unit USIM, with the collaboration with Universitas Gadjah Mada, I hope that you enjoyed the talk, and I look forward to your participation in our upcoming sessions. Dear audiences, we have another session today in the evening at 2 p.m. Indonesian time and 3 p.m. Malaysian time on the law of the sea border issues, which will be presented by Associate Professor Dr. Muhammad Hazmi bin Muhammad Rosli from UC Malaysia. Don't miss out. Thank you, and don't forget to always wear your mask and stay safe. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, Pati.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Prof, mantap, Prof. Congratulations, Prof.
Thank you.
Okay, see you later.
Bye. Assalamualaikum.
Salam.
Waalaikumsalam.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you, Prof.
Thank you, Prof.
Yeah, Andy, thanks. See you later. All right.
Bye-bye.